The room went silent the moment the doctor stopped talking. Not the gentle, clinical pause I expected, but the kind that feels like a warning. Then she looked at my wedding ring and said, "Elizabeth, you need to leave your husband." I laughed at first, an awkward, breathless sound that didn't belong to me. Doctors didn't say things like that. They pointed at grainy black and white screens, circled shapes, used words like viable and normal. They didn't lean back in their chair, clasp their hands together, and look at a woman 6 weeks pregnant like they were about to ruin her life on purpose. "I'm sorry," I asked, instinctively pulling the thin paper gown tighter around my body. The ultrasound gel was still cold on my stomach. The screen beside us frozen on an image I didn't fully understand yet. Dr. Carter didn't repeat herself right away. She stood, locked the exam room, door locked it, then sat back, down across from me like this was no longer a medical appointment but a confession. "I need you to listen carefully," she said, "and I need you to promise you won't mention this conversation to anyone." Not yet. My heart began to pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. An hour earlier, I'd been texting my husband Ryan heart emojis, joking about baby names, imagining how we'd surprise our families at Thanksgiving. We'd been married 4 years. Stable, predictable, safe. "What's wrong with the baby?" I whispered. She shook her head slowly. "The baby is unusual, and that's the problem." She turned the ultrasound monitor toward me and pointed at a specific cluster of shapes. I nodded like I understood, even though it all looked like static and shadows. "This marker here," she said, tapping the screen, "combined with your blood work and genetic history, indicates something I've only seen twice in my career." My mouth went dry. "Is it fatal?" "No," she said. "It's inherited." Relief washed through me for half a second until she added, "And it's not compatible with what you've told me about your husband." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" She exhaled slowly like she was choosing between professional ruin and my sanity. "Elizabeth, biologically speaking, this child could not exist if your husband is who he says he is." I felt dizzy. "Are you saying he's cheating on me?" She shook her head again. "No, I'm saying Ryan's medical records. I shouldn't even have access to don't match what I'm seeing on this screen." My hands curled into fists. "Then what are you saying?" Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "I'm saying your husband is not who you think he is. And if you don't get away from him before this pregnancy progresses, you and this baby could be in serious danger." I opened my mouth to argue, to defend the man I shared a bed with every night, but no sound came out. Because suddenly, things I'd ignored for years were lining up in my head. The missing childhood photos, the unexplained scars, the way Ryan never ever went to the doctor. Dr. Carter met my eyes. "I'm begging you," she said quietly. "Get a divorce, now." I didn't drive home after the appointment. I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot for nearly an hour, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The world outside looked normal: nurses walking to lunch, a man loading groceries into his trunk, a mother buckling a toddler into a car seat. Ordinary life. Meanwhile, mine had just tilted off its axis. "Your husband is not who you think he is." The words replayed over and over, growing louder each time. Ryan wasn't perfect, but he wasn't dangerous. He made coffee every morning, remembered my favorite Thai order, rubbed my back when my anxiety spiked. Monsters didn't do those things. Liars, maybe, but not whatever Dr. Carter was implying. I finally drove, not home, but to a small park by the river where Ryan and I used to jog on weekends. I needed space where his presence didn't echo off every wall. I sat on a bench and stared at the water, replaying our history with a new lens. Ryan had appeared in my life fully formed. No hometown friends, no college roommates, no awkward childhood stories. He always joked that his past was boring, that he preferred living in the present. I'd found it refreshing at first. Now it felt calculated. My phone buzzed. "Ryan, how'd the appointment go? Everything okay with our little peanut?" My stomach twisted. I typed yes, then deleted it, typed fine, Deleted that too. Me, doctor, ran longer than expected. I'll explain tonight. He responded immediately. Want me to pick up dinner? Normal, steady, caring. Exactly like the man Dr. Carter had just told me to run from. I remembered something else she'd said before I left. She'd scribbled a number on the back of a business card and slid it into my hand. If you decide to leave, she'd said, call this attorney. She specializes in cases where privacy and speed matter. What kind of divorce required speed? I pulled the card from my purse and stared at it. I didn't call. I wasn't ready to blow up my marriage based on a doctor's fear and a blurry image on a screen. I needed proof, or at least answers. That night, I watched Ryan closely. The way he moved through our kitchen, the way his eyes flicked to his phone when it buzzed, the way he kissed my forehead a second too long when I told him I was tired. Everything okay? He asked, searching my face. Just overwhelmed, I said. Pregnancy hormones. He smiled, relieved, and pulled me into a hug. His heartbeat was steady. Human. Familiar. But when he went to shower, I did something I'd never done in 4 years of marriage. I opened his laptop. It wasn't locked. It never had been. That had always felt like trust. Now it felt like confidence. What I found wasn't an affair. It was worse. Folders, encrypted files, medical documents under different names, a digital trail that didn't belong to one man but several. And at the center of it all, a report with my name on it, dated 2 years before I met him. I didn't breathe while I scrolled. That's not an exaggeration. I became aware of my lungs only when my vision started to blur and my chest burned. The report was clinical, detached, written in the language of professionals who described human lives the way engineers describe systems. Subject, Elizabeth Monroe. Age, 27. Baseline health, optimal. Genetic markers, rare, stable, highly compatible. Compatible with what? My hands trembled as I read on. Blood panels. Hormone profiles. Notes about long-term viability and maternal resilience. This wasn't a background check. This was a selection. I snapped the laptop shut when I heard the shower turn off. My heart hammered so hard. I was sure Ryan would hear it through the steam and running water. I moved back to the couch, folded my hands over my stomach, and tried to look like a woman thinking about baby names, not one who'd just discovered. Her life might be a controlled experiment. Ryan came out smiling, towel around his waist, completely unbothered. You okay? He asked again. Yes, I said too quickly, then softened it. Just tired. He nodded, kissed my temple, and went to get dressed. The casual intimacy made my skin crawl. That night, I barely slept. Every time Ryan shifted beside me, I wondered how much of him was real. The warmth of his body, the rhythm of his breathing. Were those habits learned or genuine? And worse, was the baby inside me part of whatever this was? The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Then I called the number on the back of Dr. Carter's card. The attorney, a woman named Janice Holloway, didn't ask many questions. She just said, "You're not the first woman to call me under these circumstances." That sentence terrified me more than anything else so far. We met in her office that afternoon. Thick walls. No windows. A white noise machine humming softly in the corner. You're married to a man who doesn't exist in any traditional sense, Janice said, sliding a file across the table. At least not under one consistent identity. I swallowed. Who is he? She hesitated. That depends on which agency you ask. The room seemed to tilt. Agency? Janice leaned forward. Elizabeth, your husband is part of a classified biomedical program that began over 20 years ago. The men involved are genetically modified at the embryonic level. Enhanced immune systems. Extended cellular longevity. And, she paused, reproductive. Capabilities that don't follow standard human rules. I pressed a hand to my stomach instinctively. The program was shut down publicly, she continued, But fragments continued privately. You weren't chosen at random. You were screened, monitored, paired. Paired, I repeated hollowly. Yes, and pregnancies like yours are extremely rare. She met my eyes. That's why your doctor panicked. I felt something inside me fracture, not just fear, but grief. For the illusion of my marriage. For the love story I thought I was living. What happens if I leave? I asked. Janice's expression hardened. Then you disappear quietly and protect yourself and your child. And if I don't? She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was low. Then the program notices you've become non-compliant. That night, Ryan came home early with flowers. Red roses. My favorite. You seem distant lately, he said gently. I just want us to be okay. I smiled back, heart pounding, and realized the most dangerous thing about Ryan wasn't the secrets. It was that part of him genuinely loved me. And I didn't yet know if that made him easier or harder to escape. I started lying to Ryan the way people do when they're buying time. Carefully, sparingly, with just enough truth wrapped around each omission to feel almost honest. I told him work was stressful, that the pregnancy hormones were messing with my sleep. The Dr. Carter wanted a follow-up scan in a few weeks because my dates might be off. He accepted all of it with that steady calm that once felt like safety, and now felt like surveillance. Janice advised me not to leave immediately. Abrupt departure trigger attention, she said. You need to look normal while we prepare contingencies for my own marriage. Over the next few days, I noticed things I'd never questioned before. Ryan always knew when I'd be home, even when my schedule changed. He never asked how my day was, only if it was okay. His phone was always on silent, face down, and at night, sometimes I'd wake to find him watching me sleep, not in a creepy way, but in a focused, evaluative way, like he was checking that something important was still intact. The second ultrasound happened. Sooner than expected, Dr. Carter had arranged it off the books. As she put it, at a private imaging center across town. No insurance. No digital records. This time, she didn't try to soften the truth. The fetus is developing faster than normal, she said, pointing at the screen. Cellular regeneration is off the charts. Neural activity is unprecedented. I searched her face. Is my baby human? She didn't hesitate. Yes, but not only human. I cried then, quietly. Not from fear exactly, but from the weight of it all pressing down at once. I hadn't just married into something dangerous. I'd been recruited into it without my consent. My body, my future. My child had all become assets in a program that never asked permission. After the scan, Dr. Carter walked me to my car. They'll notice soon, she said. Changes like this don't stay invisible. Who is they? I asked. She hesitated. People who believe progress justifies secrecy. And control. That night, Ryan cooked dinner. Real dinner, candlelight, soft music. The kind of evening that felt deliberately romantic, like he was reinforcing something fragile. I've been thinking, he said casually, pouring wine. Maybe after the baby's born, we move. Somewhere quieter. Safer. My pulse spiked. Move where? West, he said. Near some colleagues. Colleagues. Not friends, not family, colleagues. I smiled, nodded, took a sip of wine I didn't want, and that's a big decision. He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was warm, human. Everything I do is to protect you, he said softly. The lie was almost true. That was the worst part. Later that night, I stepped into the bathroom and locked the door. I stared at myself in the mirror, one hand on my stomach, and made a decision that scared me more than anything else so far. I wasn't just going to run, I was going to find out exactly what Ryan was and what my baby was becoming. Because if they thought I was just a passive participant, they'd made a critical miscalculation. And for the first time since that doctor locked the exam room door, I wasn't just afraid, I was ready. I started preparing the way people do when they know a storm is coming but don't yet know how violent it will be. Quietly, methodically, I copied documents from Ryan's laptop when he slept, photographing screens instead of downloading files so nothing would register as missing. I memorized file names, acronyms, internal references that meant nothing to me yet, but would later become threads to pull. Janice arranged a safe deposit box under an alias and told me to keep physical backups. Papers still mattered when systems could be erased. At work, I told my manager I was taking intermittent medical leave. No details. Pregnancy complications were a shield people didn't question. At home, I played the part Ryan expected. Attentive, slightly anxious, grateful for his care. It felt like acting inside my own life. The first crack in Ryan's composure came 3 days later. We were watching TV when his phone buzzed. Not a call, not a text. Something else. He stiffened. Just a fraction, but I saw it. Everything okay? I asked lightly. Yes, he said too fast, already standing. I need to step outside for a minute. He didn't take his phone with him? That was news. I waited 30 seconds and picked it up. It unlocked with his face when I angled it toward the doorway. I hated myself for how easily it worked. The notification was from an app I didn't recognize. No name. Just a symbol like a stylized helix. One line of text, anomaly escalation confirmed. Gestational markers accelerating. I set the phone down exactly where it had been before my hands started shaking. When Ryan came back in, he studied my face carefully. You look pale. I'm tired, I said. It wasn't a lie. That night, I dreamed of corridors long, white, endless. Of glass rooms and voices speaking in measured tones about outcomes and risks. I woke with my heart racing and a sharp pain low in my abdomen. Janice answered my call at 4:12 a.m. They've noticed, I said. Yes, she replied calmly. That was inevitable. What happens now? Now they assess whether you're compliant or a variable. The word chilled me. Variable. Something to be controlled or eliminated. 2 days later, a man showed up at our door. Mid-40s. Polite smile. Expensive coat. He introduced himself as Dr. Simon Haley, a consultant affiliated with a maternal health foundation. He congratulated us on the pregnancy and asked if he could come in. Ryan didn't hesitate. That told me everything. Dr. Hal spoke gently, carefully, like someone used to delivering bad news without ever naming it. He talked about monitoring, support, resources. He looked at my stomach more than my face. We like to ensure mothers like you feel supported, he said. What kind of support? I asked. The kind that keeps everyone safe, he replied smoothly. I felt it then, the line, step back and disappear quietly, or step forward and become a problem. That night, I packed a go bag and hid it in my car. Clothes, cash, documents, Janice's number written on paper. Ryan watched me from the bedroom doorway. You're pulling away, he said softly. I met his eyes. You lied to me. Something in his expression broke, not anger, not denial, grief. I was trying to protect you, he said. By turning me into an experiment? He didn't answer. And in that silence, I knew something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't the subject anymore. I was the threat they hadn't planned for. I didn't run that night. That was the first thing I did differently than they expected. Fear makes people predictable, Janice had said. Panic creates clean exits. Thought creates leverage. So I stayed, slept beside Ryan, and pretended everything was normal while my mind worked like it never had before. The next morning, Ryan called in sick for the first time in our marriage. He hovered, attentive to the point of suffocation. Every glass of water, every step I took, every wince of discomfort drew his eyes back to my body like I was a fragile device that might malfunction. By noon, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Unknown. Elizabeth Monroe. This is Dr. Hale. We'd like to schedule enhanced monitoring starting this week. I stared at the message, then typed carefully. Me. My attorney advised me not to consent to anything without written documentation. The reply came slower this time. Dr. Halley, you have an attorney? Good, let that unsettle him. I spent the afternoon doing something that felt almost surreal. Researching myself, Janice had given me access to a secure database scraps of declassified material. Whistleblower leaks, court-sealed cases that never made the news. It wasn't hard to find patterns once I knew what to look for. Women who disappeared during pregnancies. Sudden international relocations. Babies. Listed as stillborn with no bodies. Released to families. But there were outliers. A few cases where the mother resisted, lawyered up, went public, or created too much legal exposure. In those cases, the program backed off. Not because it was right, because it was risky. That was my opening. That evening, I told Ryan I wanted a divorce. No yelling, no drama, just the word, placed carefully between us like a blade on the table. He closed his eyes. They told me this might happen. Who is they? The people who made me, he said quietly. And what's inside you? The honesty stunned me more than any lie. I didn't choose you randomly, he continued. But I didn't fake what we had either. That part was real. I love you, Elizabeth. I believed him, and that somehow made it worse. Then help me, I said. Help me protect our child. He laughed softly, broken. You don't understand. They won't let you go. I leaned forward. They don't have to let me go. They just have to decide I'm not worth the fallout. The next day, Janice filed an emergency legal injunction citing medical coercion, reproductive rights violations, and unlawful surveillance. Simultaneously, she sent sealed notices to 3 federal oversight committees and 1 investigative journalist with a reputation for destroying careers. Within hours, Dr. Haley called again. His voice had lost its warmth. This is unnecessary, he said. No, I replied calmly. What's unnecessary is monitoring a pregnant woman without consent. By Friday, the tone shifted entirely. Meetings became requests. Monitoring became optional. The word program was never spoken again. Ryan moved out quietly. No confrontation. No agents, just absence. A week later, Dr. Carter called me herself. Your markers are stabilizing, she said, awe in her voice. It's like the stress response changed the trajectory. I placed a hand on my stomach, feeling a steady, reassuring flutter. For the first time since that first ultrasound, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing, and whatever this child was becoming, it would not belong to them. The silence that followed Ryan's departure was the loudest thing I'd ever experienced. No encrypted pings, no unfamiliar cars idling outside, no polite men with expensive coats asking careful questions. Just the normal sounds of my apartment settling at night, the hum of the refrigerator, the city breathing through the open window. It felt wrong at first, like calm after a siren shuts off, when your body hasn't realized the danger has passed. I moved through my days cautiously, half expecting the other shoe to drop. Janice told me this phase was typical. They retreat when exposure risk outweighs benefit, she said. But they don't forget. I didn't forget either. I began documenting everything. Not for a lawsuit, but for myself. Dates, names, exact phrasing of conversations. The way Dr. Hale's tone shifted once lawyers were involved. The way Ryan's eyes had carried both affection and resignation. Like a man who knew how the story usually ended and still hoped for a different version. At 20 weeks, the pregnancy reached a point. Dr. Carter called medically. Fascinating. The baby's development was advanced but stable. Strong heartbeat. High neural activity. No signs of distress. You're carrying something extraordinary, she said, but not dangerous. That distinction mattered. I started therapy not because I was falling apart, but because I refused to normalize what had happened to me. My therapist didn't let me minimize it. You were groomed, she said gently. Even if affection was real, consent was compromised. Naming it helped. So did anger. Clean, focused anger, not the kind that consumes you, but the kind that sharpens your sense of justice. 3 weeks later, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. No subject line, just one sentence. "We hope you and the child remain healthy." No signature, no threat, no request. Janice confirmed what we both already knew. That's them closing the file. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt resolved. I contacted the journalist Janice had warned them with off the record at first. We met in a crowded cafe where anonymity was easy. I didn't give him documents yet. I gave him a question. "How many stories like mine do you think never get told because the women disappear?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "More than you'd want to know." That was enough. By my third trimester, my life had settled into something almost peaceful. I worked remotely. I walked every morning. I talked to my baby out loud, telling them stories about the world as it should be, not as it often was. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered where Ryan was. If he was free or just reassigned. If he thought about me the way I thought about him, with sadness, anger, and a strange kind of gratitude for the warning he'd become. I didn't hate him, but I didn't miss him either. I had learned something essential. Control thrives on silence. Safety lives in visibility. And I was done being quiet. The article didn't drop all at once. That was intentional. The journalist warned me that truth, when released too quickly, gets buried. So we paced it, breadcrumbs instead of a balm. First, a piece about unregulated biomedical programs operating in legal gray zones. Then a follow-up about reproductive coercion hidden behind private foundations and shell research grants. By the third article, anonymous sources started whispering about enhanced subjects and controlled pairings. By the fourth, people were paying attention. I never gave my name. Not yet. I was a verified source, a woman directly affected, a former participant, but even without my face attached, the story took on a life of its own. Congressional aides began making quiet inquiries. Ethics boards announced internal reviews. A foundation Dr. Halley had once represented abruptly shut down its website. Janice called me one afternoon, voice tight with excitement. "They're cannibalizing themselves," she said. "Everyone's scrambling to limit liability." I placed a hand on my stomach as my baby kicked, strong and steady. "Good," I said. At 36 weeks, Dr. Carter recommended a planned delivery. Not because of danger, because of unpredictability. "I want every variable controlled," she said. "For once, on your terms." The delivery room was calm. No observers. No consultants. Just a small medical team I trusted, and Bellamy, my oldest friend, holding my hand. When my child was placed on my chest, slick and warm and very real, something inside me finally unclenched. They were perfect. Not in a mythical sense, in a human one. The tests afterward confirmed what we already knew. Enhanced immune response, accelerated cellular repair, heightened neural connectivity. Extraordinary but not weaponized. Not owned. Men. 2 weeks after the birth, I received one final message. This time it came through Janice, delivered like a courtesy. "The program has been formally terminated." I laughed when she read it to me. "Formally," I repeated. "How comforting." "They're scared," she said. "And for the first time, they should be." I sat on my couch that night, my baby sleeping on my chest. The city lights blinking outside the window. I thought about the version of myself. Who'd walked into that first? Ultrasound appointment. Expecting reassurance and left with a warning that shattered her marriage and her sense of reality. She'd been afraid, confused, alone. I wasn't her anymore. I'd learned that love without consent is just another form of control. That safety isn't something you're granted, it's something you defend. And that being chosen without your knowledge doesn't obligate you to comply. Somewhere out there, people like Dr. Halley were rewriting protocols, burying files, pretending this had been a misunderstanding. Let them. The truth had already slipped out. And if my child ever asked about their father, I'd tell them this. He was a man built by others who tried, imperfectly, to choose love anyway. But I chose something better. I chose freedom. 5 years later, I stood at the edge of a playground in Northern California, coffee cooling in my hand, watching my child climb a rope ladder with fearless concentration. Sunlight filtered through the trees. Kids laughed, parents scrolled their phones, and the world looked exactly as ordinary as it should. That ordinariness still felt like a quiet miracle. My life now would look unremarkable to anyone observing from the outside. I worked as a bioethics consultant, advising hospitals and research boards on informed consent, transparency, and patient protection. I spoke at universities. I testified once closed session, no cameras, but real consequences followed. Laws changed slowly, but they did change. Oversight became stricter. Funding dried up for private initiative that thrived on secrecy. I never gave interviews. I never sold my story. Visibility didn't mean exposure, it meant leverage, used carefully. Sometimes, late at night, when my child slept curled against me, I wondered what might have happened if I'd ignored the doctor's fear, if I'd trusted comfort over instinct, if I'd stayed quiet. The thought still sent a chill through me. Not because of what they might have done, but because of how easily I might have surrendered myself trying to be reasonable. Ryan never contacted me again. Once, years later, I thought I saw him in a crowd at a train station. Same posture, same careful stillness. Or maybe it was just my memory stitching familiar shapes out of strangers. Either way, I didn't follow. Some chapters don't need closure to be complete. My child grew strong, healthy, brilliant, in ways that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with curiosity, kindness, and stubborn independence. When teachers praised their advanced abilities, I smiled politely and redirected the conversation to effort and joy. I refused to let anyone frame my child as exceptional in a way that made them less free. One afternoon, during a routine checkup, a young resident glanced at the chart, frowned slightly, then looked up at me. "There's a note here," she said carefully. "It says your pregnancy was unusual." I met her eyes and smiled. "Many things are," I said. "What matters is how we respond to them." She nodded, accepting that answer without pushing. I felt a quiet pride, not in secrecy, but in choice. Years ago, a doctor had looked at an ultrasound and begged me to get a divorce. At the time, it felt like the end of everything I thought I knew. In truth, it was the beginning of something far more important: my refusal to be managed, minimized, or owned. I didn't win by destroying anyone. I didn't win by exposing everything. I won by stepping out of the system that assumed compliance was inevitable. As my child ran back toward me, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, I knelt and opened my arms. They collided with me at full speed, laughing, alive, utterly unconcerned with the invisible battles that had shaped their existence. And in that moment, I knew this was the truth I'd never expected. Freedom isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It looks like a quiet afternoon, a safe future, and a life no one gets to take from you. That was never just my victory. It was ours.